rift. It is us Ugandans. That's why we are here. Telling the French embassy, it is time to focus our energy to pull out of this dead-end project.
East Africa is embarking on its most ambitious project yet. This comes after Uganda and Tanzania signed bilateral agreements to construct the world's longest and heated crude oil pipeline spanning 1,443 kilometers from Kabale Hoima district in Uganda to the Chongoleani Peninsula near Tanga Port in Tanzania. The Black Gold Pipeline project has sparked outcry and mass protests in Uganda, South Africa, and France by climate and environmental activists who've linked the project to the oil cast phenomenon. Moreover, the crude oil pipeline project has a rich tapestry involving the geopolitics of East Africa, which, coupled with interference from foreign major oil companies, caused a rift which shattered and eclipsed Kenya's crude oil pipeline project. Here's the intricate genesis of the world's longest heated crude oil pipeline in East Africa. Uganda has long been a landlocked country. However, fate ran its course over 2 decades ago as indigenous people became cognizant of oil seepage on the shores of Lake Albert. This was later corroborated by government geologist E.J. Wayland in 1920s. This discovery led to the exploration of oil and gas reserves, which was confirmed in 5 sedimentary basins in Uganda's Rift Valley. That is the Albertine Graben, Hoima Basin, Lake Kyoga Basin, Lake Wamawa Basin, and the Kadama Moroto Basin. 2006 was a crucial year as it's reported that oil deposits in Lake Albert became commercially viable. More oil exploration was earnestly pursued by the government, which would lead to the construction of an oil pipeline, to which during this time Uganda placed heavy reliance on Kenya for its oil imports, as Uganda imports 90% of its oil from Kenya's port of Mombasa. Uganda's oil exploration would see the God who gives with both hands shine his face on neighboring country Kenya, as in 2012 in Turkana County, Lokichar Basin, oil which was commercially viable was discovered with an estimated 4 billion barrels of crude oil reserves, 750 million of which was recoverable, and which the Ministry of Petroleum and Mining assessed at 120,000 barrels of crude oil could be exported through the Lokichar-Lamu pipeline. The oil exploration was enabled through a joint venture by Tullow Oil, Africa Oil, and Total Energies. With the nascent commercially viable crude oil in the 2 East African countries and given Uganda's landlocked status, the 2 countries and Rwanda, in a tripartite agreement, agreed to construct a pipeline from Lake Albert to the Lokichar Basin in northern Kenya to Lamu, the coastal part of Kenya, where it would be exported through the Indian Ocean. However, Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni was not gung-ho about the construction of the pipeline for export. As a Pan-Africanist, he preferred an oil refinery so that the extractable oil out of the 6.5 billion barrels in Uganda would satisfy the demand for refined oil products in Eastern Africa. After driving a hard bargain with the oil companies, they compromised on constructing both the pipeline and the refinery. This project was dubbed the Uganda-Kenya Crude Oil Pipeline, and after a successful bid, Toyota Tsusho was awarded the contract to construct the oil pipeline, estimated at $5 billion for 1,476 kilometers. By dint of the fact that the pipeline would pass through northern Kenya and the Lokichar Basin, the agreement would benefit South Sudan, as the pipeline would transport its oil, which is considered to be cheaper and of higher quality, to the port of Lamu for export, ending its long-standing reliance on its neighboring country Sudan for its oil exports. It's reported that Juba's shipment capacity would be 130,000 barrels of oil per day. The Lokichar Basin route, which was a Northern Corridor Integration Project, benefited Kenya's Vision 2030, as it was within government's plan, that is a Lapsed Corridor project, which would lead developments in the marginalized northern Kenya through oil pipelines, infrastructure such as railways, highways, airports, cities, linking Kenya to South Sudan and Ethiopia. The rift. The geopolitics of East Africa cast a dark shadow over Uganda-Kenya crude oil pipeline, with Kenya's Northern Corridor project teetering on the brink of collapse. The project financiers, allegedly Total Oil, casted doubt over the viability of the northern route in Kenya, citing security concerns, as at the time, northern Kenya areas were facing terrorist attacks from the Al-Qaeda sect, the Al-Shabaab, that was raining terror. A further cause for the rift was the land acquisition and compensation procedures in Kenya, which was considered to be less seamless and more costly due to the extensive land laws. It's alleged that prominent oil companies became opposed to the northern route, and this gave rise to a further southern alternative route, Tanzania. In 2015, Tanzania elected their president John Pombe Magufuli, whose Magufulification philosophy opened up Tanzania to become more regionally integrated, with the Uganda-Kenya crude oil pipeline falling apart at the seams due to the northern route. Tanzania became a more viable option given Total's zealous lobbyism for a southern route. It's also believed that delegates from Tanzania patronized the southern route, and thus the East African crude oil pipeline was birthed. That ran 1,443 kilometers from Hoima in Uganda to the Tanga port in Tanzania. The Tanga port was deemed to be a more viable option as it could handle large volumes and required no dredging. Also, land acquisition in Tanzania was considered more seamless than Kenya. Moreover, Tanzania would charge Uganda a tariff of $12.77 per barrel. So if you're keeping a scorecard, Tanzania's route actually offered a shorter distance. It costed less than $1 billion than the Kenya's crude oil pipeline, and Tanzania is actually perceived to actually charge less than what Kenya was charging in terms of tariffs. The East African crude oil pipeline is backed by shareholders such as the Total Energies France that has a majority stake of 62%, followed by the China National Offshore Oil Corporation which has a share of 8%, lastly the Uganda National Oil Company and the Tanzania Petroleum Development Corporation, each having a share of 30% respectively. The project's initial estimate was to cost $4 billion, and this would be financed through 60% debt and 40% equity financing. The project was being financed by a myriad of prominent banks such as the Standard Chartered Bank, the Industrial Commercial Bank of China, and the Saudi Islamic Development Bank, which committed $100 million. The bank's commitment to finance the project would soon unravel, but before that, on 1st February 2022, through an announcement of the final investment decision, the project partners committed to pay $10 billion towards the completion of the crude oil pipeline. This project has been touted as having the production capacity of 230,000 barrels of crude oil per day from the Tilenga and Kingfisher oil fields. The heated crude oil pipeline will transport 246,000 barrels per day to the Tanga port, with the first oil export planned for 2025. The project has also been hailed for job creation, improving livelihoods, enhancing bilateral trade, and increasing foreign direct investment of up to 60% between the two countries. The project has also been touted for the development of infrastructure through improvement of logistics and modern communications with a fiber optic cable, and thereby enhancing skill and technology transfers. The project, however, has gained its fair share of global criticisms with the infamous hashtag #StopEACOP. With the project starting from the Murchison Falls National Park, this has led to accusations of ecocide being leveled against the crude oil pipeline as a project negatively affecting wildlife, forests, lakes, such as the second largest freshwater lake in the world, Lake Victoria, which the activists perceive will face pollution, which will affect the livelihoods of many people. The project has also been criticized for having the potential of producing allegedly 33 million tons per year of carbon emissions. Some project-affected persons have also decried displacement from their land. Further, they've decried the disturbance of their loved ones' grave sites on their land. As revealed in the Green Faith report, they have also raised land compensation issues as they claim that they were paid a paltry sum. The affected persons have also faced floods, food insecurity challenges in their new settlement areas. So what do the activists actually want? The activists are protesting the crude oil pipeline and are calling for investments into renewable energy infrastructure in East Africa. The progenitors of the East African crude oil pipeline have proffered a response to these concerns. They've claimed that as for the displacement of the people, the project affected persons received compensation for land acquisition by the government. As for the oil spillage into Lake Victoria, the project assures the safety of the pipelines and have in place oil contingency plans which involves monitoring systems and emergency response. As it pertains to biodiversity and wildlife, the project shall minimize impact of critical and natural habitats and also seek to conserve these so that they can use them as carbon offsets. Despite this response, activists have unleashed a fervent campaign putting pressure on banks financing the project. Following the mounting pressure on banks through mass protests, a slew of banks and insurers have opted out of the project, as revealed by the StopEACOP website, which alleges the banks which are no longer financing the project, such as Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan and Chase, Wells Fargo, Morgan Stanley, and most notably the Standard Chartered Bank, that plays an advisory role to the project, as it's been alleged that the bank is not involved in the $5 billion financing of the East African crude oil pipeline. Moreover, Standard Chartered Bank has also, through its climate strategy policy, committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050 and reduce its financing to clients in the oil sector to 0.03% in 2026 and zero from 2030. On the other end of the spectrum, activists have also faced a legal hurdle as they filed a suit at the East African Court of Justice, seeking a temporary injunction to stop the construction of the project until questions of environmental, social, and climate justice were heard and determined. However, the court ruled that they lacked jurisdiction, upholding the preliminary objection that was filed by the government of Uganda and Tanzania, as they claimed that the suit was time-barred and should have been instituted in around 2017. Let me know in the comments below whether the construction and development of the longest heated crude oil pipeline in the world should be sacrificed at the altar of climate change.